Well, the most important thing is doing soul work, meaning putting your soul into the conscious field where your soulmate soul can find yours. And that doesn't have to do with outward things so much as it has to do with accessing your soul. And a lot of us, that can be confusing because we may think our emotions are our soul, but usually our emotions are tied into, past issues and psychological triggers. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about nurturing your soul in some way on a daily basis, or bringing it out, finding ways that will trigger it so that it expands outside of your aura and into the conscious field where you would have other souls, and that creates a line of communication or a signal so that the other soul, when they're in that field as well, will recognize you, and then ultimately you'll meet physically. But in order to meet your soul mate, we are talking about a spiritual soul bond. We're not talking about bonding on a personality level or a cultural, social, or religious level. It's all about the soul bond. So you need to be doing soul work on a regular basis to bring that intention out there.
The field is the sole governing agency of the particle. What he meant by that is the field, the invisible forces, are the sole governing agency of the particle, matter. So it says human beings as physical matter are actually governed and shaped by the field. And this is what we're beginning to learn. Reading the field is very important for our survival.
The human body has an aura of electromagnetic light energy that radiates far beyond the boundaries of our physical body. Doing another simple experiment with our radio antenna, we can see that a weak or static radio station comes in more clearly just as our hand comes near the antenna without even touching it.
Arizona Senate Democrats pleased that President Barack Obama will be in Phoenix next week to speak about the economic stimulus plan. Minority Leader Jorge Garcia of Tucson says the emergency funds will hopefully offset spending cuts that the Republican-controlled legislature are imposing to balance the state budget.
It would put a lot more money into Arizona's economy.
This is simple scientific proof that our field is interacting with the field of the radio waves at a distance. Our consciousness transmits information into the field, but how powerful are our thoughts and feelings?
It's important to clear your field so that you are creating a very intentional signal. By that, one of the things is not dating or having flings, not holding on to semi-relationships that have your foot in, one foot in and 1 foot out. You want to clear all of that because that will actually create confusion in the line of communication. It'll make it like static, and it will also bring people around you that can misguide you, or you may think that they're the ones, but it'll be confusing you because you're sending mixed messages. So they may be partially what you want, but they're not in fact your true soulmate because you're sending out mixed messages about what you want. So it's vital to clear your space on that level. If you're looking for an intimate soulmate relationship, totally clear that space and make it open and available to actually find the true soulmate that you're looking for.
As all 7 of our body's energy centers send out living light waves of different frequencies and amplitudes, they are also sending out our personal information. This means our inner spiritual architecture represents a personal signature of our knowledge, experiences, desires, feelings, true intentions, and deepest thoughts. This signature will be met with a response, whether we are conscious of it or not.
One of the ways to understand the mystery of attraction, the mystery of what pulls some people together, why one woman will turn a man on and that same woman will not turn another, why one man will just make a woman open up in feelings of love, and that same man will be nice to another woman, but she doesn't have those same feelings to her. There's a actual dynamic between the different energy centers in the body. If we look at the 7 basic energy centers, they're like circuits in the body. And we're not all, as individuals, we're not completely whole in that all those circuits are connecting all the time. For example, I just spend time with some people and suddenly I naturally feel smarter. I feel brighter. That's because their circuits are activating a part of my circuitry that makes the energy flow more completely. Often people go to a spiritual teacher and they'll put them on a pedestal because just in the presence of that person they feel so spiritually more awakened. One of the higher centers starts to open. Well, it's not that that person sitting there would have that effect on everyone, nor does that person necessarily have all their circuits together at all. It's just that they happen to have 1 or 2 circuits that are open that complete another person. In a similar way, it's like a man being turned on to a woman over here and another man not being turned on. This woman literally activates some circuitry inside of this man that completes his energy center, so now energy is flowing to the sexual center. There's always been known in the past the muse. The muse would inspire the writer. If he didn't have the muse, that little circuitry that allows him to express what's inside of him simply couldn't be connected. So that's what the muse does. So in a variety of situations, our relationships activate certain circuits inside of ourselves that connect up the different energy centers. Generally, when we find someone that we're in love with, someone that we want to share our life with, that's what we often call a soulmate. And that's someone who activates the circuits in our heart. They activate us to the eternalness of love. And so when we interact with this person and we're open, not when we're shut down, but when we're open, we feel this part of us that can love them forever and wants to love them forever. And that's what we often define as a soulmate. They may not be the one that opens our mind or opens our sense of creativity or gives us confidence. They're going to be the one that opens our heart. It could be they can open 3 levels or 2 levels or all 7 levels. And that's the uniqueness of every relationship. Never look for perfection in a person, but to know that the perfect relationship for us is someone who stimulates in us, when we're feeling centered, they stimulate within us a feeling, a knowing that this is a person I'd like to share my life with. In their presence, I become a better person.
The people we meet and the spiritual experiences we attract by coincidences may not actually be coincidences. They may be the results of our personal broadcasting.
So when you want to make contact with your soulmate in the conscious field before actually meeting them in person, it's when you're actually doing your soul work on a daily basis that you want to put those intentions and feelings into the field. What I mean is, like during meditation or prayer, you want to put the feeling tone of wanting to meet your soulmate into that space. Or if you're writing about your inner emotions and desires, you want to put that feeling tone there. Or if you're just nurturing yourself, put the feeling tone of having a soulmate relationship in that space, in that soul work space, which will go into the conscious field. What you don't want to do is put preconceived ideas into that space about what your soulmate looks like, who they are, all those things. It has to do with control. And when you're really ready for your soulmate, you're ready to let go of your control, because a soulmate is in fact a soul bond. It doesn't have to do with all those outward, conditions or ideas. It has mostly to do with that soul connection. So that's why I say you put the feeling tone in that special space more than anything.
As human beings, each one of us is characterized by our own vibrational frequency, which is a reflection of the proteins in creating our biology. The significance is that as individuals with individual frequencies, there are some people whose frequencies are more complementary or more matching than other individuals whose frequencies are quite different. The relevance to this is that matching frequencies or complementary frequencies interact with each other and actually, in the terms of physics, interfere with each other. And as two very closely related frequencies come together, their interference patterns result in an enhancement of the field itself, a powering of that field. So this is called constructive interference, and allows two individuals that are closely related to communicate across this field. The most characteristic and easily understood communication is that it usually occurs between a mother and her child, which are of course very much connected to each other. And in fact, the child has cells from the mother in it because of the developmental processes that occur during fetal development. And more importantly, the mother has stem cells from her child in her body as a result of fetal development as well. So that both the mother and the child are actually sharing cells with the same receptor frequencies on them. And as a result, and this is very interesting because mothers will report this, that they will know if something is wrong with their child no matter where their child is on the planet. That this is a very, very common experience, that if a child is hurt, a mother will know this even if she's on the other side of the planet. This is just a demonstration of the fact that the communication between individuals can be picked up through this vibrational field, and specifically through the receptors of identity on the surfaces of our cells. Well, the significance of that is it doesn't have to be your own child. It's people that you actually complement with out in the field can communicate across these distances. And very interestingly enough, when people come together as couples and are together long enough, they can actually begin to use this field as communication mechanism without even using words. So it's very funny sometimes to hear a couple that has been together for a very long time communicate with each other with totally incomplete sentences, with no subjects or verbs, and yet both of them understanding the communication while an outside party has no idea what they're talking about. And that is because we have two levels of communication, the field and via the particle, via the body. So it's interesting that we're now beginning to recognize the field's effect, and this is very, very critical for both our communal organization as well as our own physiological expression, to recognize the power of the vibrations and how they can influence our own biology.
Brainwaves are indicative of consciousness, and consciousness can travel as a wave. These waves can be reduced to numerical values of wave particles, amplitudes, frequencies, spin, codes, and information. Professional numerologists study these numbers and codes. They study the numerical values of the position of the stars and the planets at the time and date of our birth location, and our name. Is it possible for advanced numerology to determine our relationships and possible future outcomes?
Numbers have harmonic and disharmonic relationships, just like music does. So you can listen to certain music and you know, my gosh, I don't like it, it jars me, there's too much disharmony. And the same goes for numbers. So let's say somebody has a prevalent amount of 3s, 6s, and 9s in his or her blueprint, and they meet somebody with a lot of 4s and 8s. They're not going to get along as readily as with somebody who also has the creative 3, 6, and 9s in their blueprint. So you can see, and in the same way, there are certain numbers that are magnetically attracted to each other. Those are the numbers 4 and 8. So they have almost a fateful relationship to each other. So it gets quite complex as we look at the song and the numbers song of each person, and you actually create two blueprints, put them together, just like a musical. You take two melodies or harmonies and you put them together, and what does it create? Does it create something jarring or not? And certainly with people, we can see how their numbers will either work well together, be compatible, or be completely harmonious, just because numbers are a resonance. They describe something that is key to who you are.
Your soul energy is a unique signal that is broadcast into a field where your soulmate's soul energy is being broadcast as well. So that is where your souls are bonded when you have a soulmate, and that's where you're already having a relationship with your soulmate, whether you're aware of it or not. And whether you're aware of your soul desires and feelings or if you're not, is irrelevant, because you're already bonded with your soulmate on that level. And the goal is to become aware of yourself on that level so that you can broadcast your soul into the conscious field where your soulmate can do the same, and that will trigger and speed up the process of finding your soulmate in a physical plane so that you actually are meeting them and are able to have a relationship on a day-to-day basis.
Our DNA represents our entire genetic blueprint. It is here that everything about us is represented by letters in the DNA matrix code language. Our destiny appears fixed because of this unshakable blueprint. Dr. Fritz Albert Popp, the discoverer of biophotons in 1976, proved the origin of these human light emissions are emanating from our DNA, the core reactor from where we are broadcasting our personal energy signature. Dr. Bruce Lipton has made a revolutionary discovery that first proved that the DNA nucleus is not the brain of the cell. Rather, the intelligence center of the cell is the membrane. The membrane receives signals from our consciousness and writes the DNA code. For the first time in history, Dr. Bruce Lipton is proving that we can actually reprogram our DNA if we are dissatisfied with our blueprint, and broadcast a new message about ourselves to the universe.
The fact is that the cell membrane of the human cell actually is an information processor. And what I ultimately realized in 1985 was that that processor had a very interesting and important definition. The definition of the membrane is it's a liquid crystal semiconductor with gates and channels. When I recognized this biochemical description in 1985, I was very much amused by it because I said I've heard that exact same definition somewhere else, and actually had to go search for where I heard it or found it. And what I saw was I read it in a book called Understanding Your Microprocessor, a simpleton book about how to use a computer. Basically, the definition, liquid crystal semiconductor with gates and channels, is the exact same definition of a computer chip. What this all led to was a very simple and yet very profound understanding. The cell is an information processor because the membrane reads the environment and adjusts the biology. The nucleus of the cell with its genes represents a hard disk, and the genes are programs. Our old belief system is that the nucleus and its programs were read-only memory, so that whatever the genes are, that would be our fate. However, the new insights offered revealed that the nucleus of the cell was not read-only, it was actually read-write. So basically, the cell was a programmable device. You'd put it into an environment, it would read the environment, and then adjust the expression of the genes to match the needs of that environment. So taking genetically identical cells and putting one set into a culture with certain environmental conditions caused the cell to program itself as a muscle cell, and a genetically identical cell put in yet another environment, reading the constituents of that environment would lead to the expression of a bone cell. So basically, the cells are programmable in response to environmental information. And one last piece just to tie it together for all of us to understand is that if you put a culture dish of cells into an adverse environment, then what would happen is that those cells would actually get sick and start to die. And if you take that very same culture dish and move it into a healthy environment, the same cells would immediately recover and start to proliferate, and the cultures will flourish. The relevance about all this is that we go back to the nature of a human being and recognize that containing 50 trillion cells, the human body is essentially a skin-covered petri dish. If you take your human petri dish body and put it into an adverse environment, it will cause the cells to get sick and to actually begin to die. And yet if you take that same skin-covered body and put it into a healthy environment, the cells will rapidly recover and begin to flourish again. So the important reality is that our state of health or disease is really a reflection of the environment that we live in and the environment that we perceive.
like, don't trust me. He goes, I will torment you. And I swear to God, that's what ended up happening. I've been tormented by this relationship.
In each one of us, there are 46 human chromosomes, among which there are nearly 3 billion base pairs of DNA. That means there are 3 billion strands inside of us to store our personal information. If we can rewrite our own hard drive by reorganizing our thoughts, feelings, and higher consciousness, we can reprogram our own personal blueprint to attain any goal we desire. As our personal energy signature broadcasts this new message, we will discover new people in our coincidence meetings. We will also gain new knowledge to apply towards our own enlightenment, relationships, careers, and life purpose. Scientific studies have shown the heart is not only the most powerful center in the body, it is the most intelligent, having the ability to receive precognition. If we can create a coherence with our minds and heart center, we can access our intuition more frequently.
One of the interesting studies that was done here at the Institute of Heart Math with our chief researcher, Dr. Roland McCready, was a study on intuition, on the intuitive response. And in that study, they had test subjects that were placed in front of a computer, and they were wired up. They were looking at brain waves, they were looking at galvanic skin response, they were looking at readings from the heart rate variability analysis, and things like that. The test subject would push a button and there would be a delay before the picture would appear on the screen of the computer. And the computer was randomly selecting the pictures. No one knew, no one could know what the computer was going to select. Some of the pictures were pleasant and some were horrific. What we found was that in many cases the body started responding to the upcoming picture, responding in the way it would normally to the upcoming picture. About 6 seconds prior to the picture actually showing up on the screen. 6 seconds prior, the body began to do what it would do if the picture was there. It was a very, very complicated study, a very detailed study, published in 2 parts in the Journal of Complementary and Alternative Medicine. The data analysis showed something very, very interesting. It showed that when that response began, that the first part of our physiology that was doing sort of the intuitive or precognitive response was actually the heart. The heart was responding before the brain. It began to go through a deceleration process that would be compatible with the picture that was going to come up. About 1.5 seconds later, the brain began to do what it does in regards to that picture. But within the human system, at the physiological level, measuring that intuitive response to an upcoming event, it was the heart that responded first. And as I read the summary of that study, I found it fascinating, because what the summary basically said was that it appears as if an upcoming event is significant or emotional, that we have a tendency to be able to sense that or to respond to it before it actually occurs. And that our biology has the capacity and does in many ways scan for the future events. It's constantly scanning for future events, but that it's something we're not aware of. We don't know that it's there. We don't know that we do it. But the punchline was it would be very useful for us to develop that. And it has a lot of utility, a lot of practicality in how we navigate our lives. And so it's just one study beginning to decode, something that's remained sort of mystical or sort of vague, which is intuition. What is intuition? And I think certainly there's a lot more to go in that area, but this is one study that indicates that there is a response, that the body itself is actually scanning for future events, and that the first responder to that entire process is not the brain, but in fact it is the heart.
We know that our whole biosystem begins to shift in terms of what we in sports psychology have been referring to as being in our zone. So when a person learns to open into that more quantum attuned way of being aware and being present, it's like instead of focusing in narrow band, problem focused, fear-based ways, where we're looking at some kind of threat and focused entirely on a problem, and all our internal organs begin to contract, and thus our emotional system begins to go into overreaction. When when we're feeling and emoting, when we're being within that zone space, our internal organs begin to open up. They begin to relax. Our awareness field, instead of being narrowband focused, starts to broadband focus. And what studies have shown is that in that state, we actually begin to process way more bits of information per moment. And when we're in that state, we have the experience as though time is slowing down. Because we know from time and motion studies in movie projection that when we feed more frames of information per moment through a projector, it creates the illusion of time slowing down. So this is often what people experience when they're in that zone state of more quantum field, present attuned awareness. They start to feel like they can make much more effective decisions in a kind of ongoing flow-like way. We've all had tastes of what it's like to be in this zone. Those are those magical times when you have a few hours, a few days sometimes, even sometimes a few weeks, where it seems like you just can't do anything wrong. Everything comes up roses. You're in the right place at the right time, the right information comes to you, you start to feel like you're being guided to make the right decision. So this is part of what we're talking about in terms of becoming more quantum level attuned.